All right, welcome back, World History. We are on the final installment here of World War One. We left off in the last video with the entrance of the United States to the war, and I told you that this will be the end of the stalemate. The United States troops will break the stalemate. Okay, they enter in 1917, and as we'll see in a few minutes, there's another very important event in 1917. All right, so let's move on. There's a couple new vocabulary words, and you should have or you will start the unit on propaganda. I did a separate video on that. Okay. Here's a whole bunch of propaganda posters, but um, new vocabulary word would be total war. Things are a little different now. Total war back then involved complete mobilization. Every single person, whether in the military or civilian at home, a mobilization of resources. It affected everybody's lives. You know, for most of your life, for all of your lives, as a matter of fact, at your age, the United States had been at war. And if you did not read a newspaper or watch the news, you wouldn't know it. Back then, it was different. Total war meant everything revolved around the war. Your work, your conservation of resources, the rationing of food, everything. So that's total war. And then war leads to an increased military size. So military goes up, war production of goods goes up, et cetera, et cetera. And then propaganda, like I said, becomes extremely important. So you'll have to see that lesson. I'm going to skip over that because it's in my propaganda. Manipulation of public opinion, again, is the propaganda. We want to unify the country. We want to motivate. We want to recruit soldiers, all sorts of different reasons. There's 5 of them that's in the propaganda video, so I'm going to skip over it right now for the sake of time. Women played a greater role in this war than they ever had. And in the United States, as a matter of fact, it will be women's service in World War I as nurses and stepping up in factories. This will give them eventually, within a couple years after the war, the right to vote. Okay. Women really stepped up to fill, you know, when the men went off to war, women went into the factories. Okay. Now, the next unit is going to be a unit on totalitarianism, in which we will come back to the Russian Revolution. Okay. I know we touched on it. I'm going to gloss over it. I'm going to give you just the highlights of the Russian Revolution in regards to World War One, because we're going to come back and study this more in depth in the next unit. The thing you need to know here is that Russia had not industrialized. They were between 100 and 150 years behind the rest of Europe industrializing. Therefore, they did not have the same depth of factories and to produce the military gear, the rifles, and things like that. They literally had men marching off to war without a rifle, and they were expected to pick up that gun from a dead comrade. Okay, and I'll explain why in the next unit. But we need to know that Russia was not industrialized, and they're going to suffer the consequences of that, as you see here. Okay, let's see. Just be familiar with Tsar Nicholas II. Tsar simply means king, just like Kaiser, only in Russian. So Tsar Nicholas II. All right, so what starts happening? Russia is in the war from the beginning, but they get out early. They suffer heavy losses, and the people have basically had enough. Okay. The Tsar ends up abdicating, which means he gives up his throne, and this leaves a power vacuum. Okay, because the question is who's going to take over, and so it basically leads to a civil war. The first guy to step up is Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. Okay, we'll know him Lenin. His head looks like a light bulb. This guy right here, and Lenin led this political party called the Bolsheviks. So interestingly enough, the Germans actually helped smuggle him back because he had been exiled. the Germans want him to go in and stir up problems, and he does. By 1917, the Russians are through with the war. They are over and done. And here comes Lenin promising peace, land, and bread. So he sounds like a good option. Again, I'll come back to this next unit. Long story short, Russia withdraws from the war. They leave. That means there is no longer a two-front war. So that benefits Germany. This was called the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. And what we see here also is that Russia loses a large chunk of land. Okay? Significant because they will want it back. I'm thinking ahead to World War II. Okay? All right, so that's all you need to know in terms of that. It does start a bloody civil war. We'll cover that in the next unit. And the communists win. All right, so let's get to the end of the war. A lot of significance come here. We mentioned in the last discussion that the treaty that ends World War One, the Treaty of Versailles, will directly lead to World War Two. World War One will be the most destructive war in the world's history. I believe they say you could add up all the wars previous, and they would not have measured up to the amount dead here. You can examine this chart at your own leisure, but you look at the main belligerents: Germany, Russia, France, Austria, Hungary. And Britain. They're all losing 1 million people, and that's dead, not including wounded. Let's see here. Okay, new word: armistice. An armistice is just a ceasefire. So when the armistice is signed, it is an agreement to stop the fighting. They still need to sign an official treaty. That takes time, okay? So the armistice leads to the treaty. An armistice is a good thing. The German people were very unhappy. Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicates and sets up this new government called the Weimar Republic. Um, November 11th of 1918 is when it's signed. That's why we have Veterans Day, November 11th. It was signed on the 11th month, 11th day of the 11th hour. All right. So the communists have taken over in Russia. This is a threat to everybody else. Everybody's thinking about communism. Everybody's thinking about what can they get after the war. I mentioned the other day that 4 empires will collapse. The Russian Empire will collapse, the Ottoman Empire will collapse, the Austro-Hungarian Empire will collapse, and the German Empire will collapse. All right. I'll let you take a look on your own at the new countries created, just to name a few in here: Latvia, Lithuania, Poland. Romania gets larger. Also, when you look at the new countries, look at which countries got created, new countries, and which ones got smaller and which ones got larger. All right, let's get on to the peace settlements. The Great War, as it was called, again ended November 11th, 1918. Germany signed this armistice, and that was the end. Now, the peace treaty will come to be dominated by what they called the Big Four. The Big Four was basically the winners, and these large four that played the most role, the largest role in the war. And that was the United States with President Wilson. It was France with George Clemenceau. It was Italy with Vittorio Orlando, and David Lloyd George with Great Britain. Sometimes they are referred to as the Big Three because Italy kind of didn't matter. And again, this plays a significant role because Italy walks out of this peace conference unhappy. And that is no surprise why they were allied with us. They were our allies in World War One, but in World War Two they are our enemy. Okay. I also want to note that Germany and Russia were excluded from the peace conference. They weren't even invited, had no representation. Okay, so again, this feelings of bitterness and resentment, anger. Woodrow Wilson, the US president, dominated the peace conference with what's called the 14 points. Why? Because he literally had a peace plan for the world, and it was divided into 14 steps, okay, or 14 different things that they wanted. These right here are addressing the mania causes, trying to sort that out. Self-determination means you get to choose what type of government. And then 14th is the League of Nations. Sounds familiar, right? Sounds like the United Nations, and you are correct. It was first called the League of Nations. Obviously, the League of Nations does not work because we get Second World War. Okay, I'll let you look over Wilson's 14 points. Ironically, he pushed this hard, but even the United States did not adopt it. Some of these were adopted. Okay, let's look at the actual Treaty of Versailles itself, because again, it leaves feelings of bitterness and resentment. It is punitive, meaning it was designed to punish. They called it a treaty built on quicksand after the fact, obviously not during it, okay, because it wasn't stable. Um, I'm running out of time here, so let me cruise through this. You can look at it. The treaty punished Germany. Again, Germany was not invited. It was unfair. Germany lost territory while the winners didn't. Germany lost its military while the winners didn't. Germany was restricted on the weapons it could make or import. And then perhaps one of the worst, the most humiliating, was the war guilt, Article 231, the war guilt clause. It placed literally all the responsibility of the war on Germany. And you know for a fact, Germany was not the only one engaging in militarism, alliances, nationalism, and imperialism. So this was not fair, but yet they were forced to sign and take all responsibility. And then to add insult to injury, Germany, because they perceived them as responsible, had to pay the winners back their costs for fighting in the war. This is called reparations to the tune of $33 billion. That's about 400 billion in today's dollars. Germany was stripped of its overseas colonies. They lost more land. The winners did not. As a matter of fact, the winners gained new land to manage. And then Japan and Italy were upset out of the treaty because they did not receive the land that they felt they should have. Remember, they had joined thinking this would be a good way to help out with the Allies and gain some more territory. So, no surprise that Germany, Italy, and Japan will make up the Allies' enemies in World War II because they're all very upset with the treaty. And there's some other factors that come into play. This is a quick synopsis chart of the Treaty of Versailles. You can look that over. It's basically a summary of what I just talked about. And then I had mentioned in our Zoom meeting the Armenian genocide. I posted one of these. This is the original genocide. Some people say that Hitler took his blueprints for the Jews from this. And I posted that video. It's about 15 minutes. I would encourage you to watch it. I posted that video on Jupiter as well. Okay? All right. Thanks, guys.